Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are going to be talking about something I think is pretty interesting. It's the appeal of damaged detectives on TV.
Yeah,
We're going to be looking at this list-verse article called Top 10 Damaged Detectives in TV, which you provided.
right.
And our mission, I guess, today is to go beyond just like listing their traumas and really like try and figure out, what makes these characters so interesting? Why are we as viewers so drawn to these flawed heroes?
Right.
And what does that say about us?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're kind of seeing a shift in how law enforcement is portrayed on screen.
Right.
Instead of that classic infallible hero like you see in a lot of the older shows, there's this growing trend of showing detectives battling personal demons,
Yeah,
often stemming from past traumas.
exactly. It's like we're moving past the shiny facade and
Right.
getting a glimpse into the raw, like vulnerable side of these characters.
Yeah.
So this list-verse article ranks 10 detectives,
Okay.
each more damaged than the last.
Right.
We can start with number 10, James Cormack.
Okay.
He's the protagonist of Black Snow, and his backstory is pretty heavy. As a child, he witnessed his mother's death during a fight with his alcoholic father.
Wow.
And to make matters worse, his brother disappeared in the aftermath.
Oh, so that's like a textbook case of how childhood trauma shapes an individual's entire worldview.
Right.
Like, even as an adult, he's crippled by the thought of confronting his father. He's frozen in that moment of loss and fear.
It makes you wonder if his dedication to solving crimes, especially those involving missing children, is a way of trying to make amends for the past. For the brother he couldn't save.
It's possible. I mean, trauma often manifests in our choices,
Right.
driving us to seek control or resolution in ways we might not even consciously understand.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to number 9, Reka Gama from the South African series, Reka. Now, her trauma stems from a deeply disturbing experience. She was abducted as a child and raised by her captor.
Wow. What's so fascinating about Reika's case is the complexity of her relationship with her abductor.
Right.
It's a twisted dynamic. And the show doesn't shy away from exploring the psychological impact of such an experience.
Right.
It makes you question the very nature of Stockholm Syndrome
Right.
and how trauma can warp even the most fundamental human bonds.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's definitely not your typical good versus evil scenario. There's a disturbing gray area that forces the viewer to confront some pretty uncomfortable truths about human nature.
Yeah.
Okay, now speaking of characters who struggle with their past, let's talk about Jesse Stone. He clocks in at number 8.
Okay.
He's the police chief from the series of the same name. On the surface, he seems like he has it together, but underneath it all, he's a recovering alcoholic haunted by past mistakes.
Yeah, Jesse Stone's a great example of how trauma can manifest in self-destructive behavior. Yep. His alcoholism isn't just a personal failing. It's a symptom of a deeper struggle with guilt and isolation and the inability to connect with others. It's a vicious cycle that many people who have experienced trauma find themselves trapped in.
Yeah. It's like he's using alcohol to numb the pain,
Yeah.
to create a barrier between himself and the world. And that isolation is something that we see echoed in another detective on this list, Amanda Farrell. She comes in at number 7.
Okay.
She's the protagonist of Troppo, and her trauma stems from a night that changed her life forever. While under the influence of a spiked drink, she accidentally killed her friend.
Oh, wow. The guilt and self-blame that she carries are just palpable.
Right.
Even though it was an accident, she can't escape the knowledge that she was responsible for another person's death. It raises the question, can you truly heal from a trauma when you believe yourself to be the source of it?
That's a heavy question. And it makes you wonder if her work as a private investigator is a way of seeking redemption, of trying to right the wrongs of the past. It's interesting how many of these detectives are driven by a need to fix things, to bring justice to the world. Almost as if their own personal pain fuels their dedication to their work.
It's a common thread that we see in many fictional portrayals of trauma.
Yeah.
The desire to protect others, to prevent similar suffering, can become a really powerful motivator.
Right.
It's like they're trying to create order out of chaos, both in the world and within themselves.
Okay, moving on to a character I bet a lot of our listeners are familiar with. Jessica Jones. She comes in at number 6.
Okay.
She's the superhero from the Marvel series. But don't let the superpowers fool ya. She's carrying some serious baggage. A horrific car accident and the psychological torture she endured at the hands of the villain Kilgrave. left her deeply scarred.
Jessica Jones is a perfect example of how trauma can impact even the seemingly strongest among us.
Right.
She might have superhuman strength, but she's also incredibly vulnerable,
Yep.
struggling with PTSD and the lingering effects of Kilgrave's manipulation.
Right.
Her story's a stark reminder that trauma doesn't discriminate,
Right.
and that even those who appear invincible can be broken from within.
It's a great example of how outward strength can sometimes mask profound inner turmoil.
Yeah.
And it challenges the idea that superheroes are immune to the same psychological wounds that afflict us mere mortals. Now, for a completely different kind of trauma, let's jump back in time to Tudor England and meet Matthew Shardlake. Number 5 on the list.
Okay.
He's the lawyer and detective from the series Dissolution. And his trauma is rooted in a lifetime of facing prejudice due to his physical deformity, a hunchback.
Shardlake's story highlights how societal attitudes and discrimination can be a profound source of trauma.
Right.
The constant stares, the whispers, the assumptions made about his capabilities, all of these chip away at his sense of self-worth. It's a reminder that trauma isn't always a singular event. It can be a slow, insidious process of being marginalized and devalued.
And that constant feeling of being othered can have a deep impact on a person's ability to trust and connect with others. It's like they're constantly on guard, expecting rejection or ridicule. Which brings us to another detective whose trauma manifests in a particularly disturbing way, Marcella Backlund, who comes in at number 4.
Okay.
She's the protagonist of the British noir series Marcella, and her story takes us into some pretty dark territory. Marcella suffers from blackouts, and during one of these episodes, she accidentally killed her own baby.
Oh my God. Marcella's case is a chilling example of how trauma can manifest in unexpected and terrifying ways. The blackouts are a coping mechanism, a way for her mind to shield itself from the unbearable pain of her past.
Right.
But they also make her incredibly dangerous, both to herself and to those around her.
It's almost as if her trauma has created a separate entity within her, one that she can't control and that has the potential to wreak havoc. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and head to the Navajo reservation where we meet Joe Leaforn, number 3 on the list.
Okay.
He's the police chief from Dark Winds, and his trauma is rooted in the loss of his son in a mine explosion.
Joe Leaforn embodies the crushing weight of grief and the struggle to find closure. The loss of a child is arguably one of the most profound traumas a person can experience.
Right.
And the show doesn't shy away from exploring the ripple effects of that loss, not just on Joe, but on his entire community.
Right.
It's a reminder that trauma can be collective as well as individual, binding people together through shared pain and the search for healing.
Yeah. It's a powerful testament to the enduring power of community, especially in the face of tragedy. Now, getting closer to our top spot at number 2, we have Will Graham from Hannibal. He's the criminal profiler with the uncanny ability to empathize with killers. But this gift, if you can call it that, comes at a heavy cost. He starts to lose himself in the process, blurring the lines between sanity and madness.
Will Graham's story is a fascinating exploration of how empathy, taken to an extreme, can become a double-edged sword.
Right.
His ability to step into the minds of killers allows him to solve crimes.
Right.
But it also exposes him to their darkness, their twisted worldview. It's almost as if he's absorbing their trauma, their evil, and it's slowly poisoning him from the inside out.
It's like his empathy is both his greatest strength and his most dangerous weakness. And his relationship with Hannibal Lecter, the brilliant but manipulative psychiatrist, only exacerbates this vulnerability. It's a toxic dynamic that pushes Will to the brink of sanity.
Hannibal Lecter is like a dark mirror for Will, reflecting back his own darkness, but amplifying it, distorting it. It's a fascinating study in how trauma can make someone susceptible to manipulation, especially by someone who understands the depths of their pain.
And finally, we arrive at the top spot, the number 1 damaged detective. The detectives from the anthology series True Detective.
Okay.
Each season features a new pair of cops haunted by a past case that has left them deeply scarred.
True Detective stands out because it's not just about solving crimes, it's about confronting the ghosts of the past.
Right.
Each season delves into the psychological toll that investigating horrific crimes takes on these detectives.
Yeah.
They're forced to revisit their own traumas, to relive their nightmares, in order to find some semblance of closure.
And it's interesting how the show uses the anthology format to explore different facets of trauma, from the lingering effects of childhood abuse to the moral compromises made in the pursuit of justice.
Right.
It's like each season is a different lens through which we can examine the complexities of human suffering and the enduring quest for meaning in the face of darkness.
It's almost as if the show is suggesting that the only way to truly move forward is to confront our demons head on.
To delve into the darkest corners of our past and wrestle with the shadows that lurk there. It's a painful process, but it's also a necessary one if we want to find any measure of peace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the act of investigation becomes a form of self-discovery,
Yeah.
forcing these detectives to confront not just the darkness of the crimes they're solving, but also the darkness within themselves. We've talked about some really compelling examples of detectives whose lives have been, deeply impacted by trauma.
Mhm.
And I'm curious to kind of dig a bit deeper into the psychology behind it all. What are some of the lasting effects of trauma that we see playing out in these characters?
Well, trauma can manifest in so many different ways.
Yeah.
We see characters like Jessica Jones and Will Graham grappling with classic symptoms of PTSD.
Right.
The flashbacks, the nightmares, the hypervigilance.
Yeah.
It's like they're constantly on edge. Their nervous systems are stuck in overdrive, even when there's no immediate threat.
And then there's Jesse Stone, whose coping mechanism is addiction.
Right. It's like he's trying to drown out the memories, the guilt, the pain of his past with alcohol.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Substance abuse is often a way of self-medicating,
Right.
a way to numb the emotional pain that feels too overwhelming to face directly. But it's a temporary fix that ultimately creates more problems. We also see characters like Amanda Farrell struggling with intense guilt and shame.
Right.
Even though her traumatic act was unintentional, it's like she's carrying the weight of that night on her shoulders, unable to forgive herself for what happened.
It makes you wonder if seeking justice for others, as she does in her work as a private investigator, is a way of trying to atone for her own perceived failings. It seems like a lot of these detectives are driven by this need to right wrongs, almost as if their own pain fuels their dedication to their work.
That's a really insightful observation.
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to create order out of chaos,
Right.
to bring a sense of balance to a world that feels inherently unfair. And it's not just about external justice. It's about seeking internal justice as well,
Yeah.
a way of making sense of their own suffering.
There's also this recurring theme of isolation that we see in so many of these characters. They push people away,
Right.
either because they're afraid of getting hurt or because they feel like they don't deserve connection.
Yeah, that's a common defense mechanism for people who've experienced trauma.
Right.
It's like they've built walls around themselves to protect themselves from further pain. But those walls also prevent them from experiencing genuine intimacy and connection.
It's a tragic irony. The very thing that they need to heal, to feel whole again, is the thing they fear the most. And yet, despite all of their flaws, their baggage, their self-destructive tendencies, we find ourselves drawn to these characters. We root for them. We empathize with their struggles. We want to see them find redemption. Why do you think that is? What is it about damaged detectives that resonates so deeply with viewers?
I think part of it is relatability. We all experience pain and hardship in our lives, and seeing these characters struggle with their demons makes us feel less alone.
Right.
It's a reminder that even the strongest, most capable people have their vulnerabilities, their scars. And it's not just about finding common ground in our pain. There's also something deeply compelling about watching these characters confront their demons, even if they stumble and fall along the way.
It's like their resilience, their refusal to give up, inspires us to face our own challenges with greater courage and determination. There's a cathartic element to it as well, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Witnessing these characters work through their trauma, even if it's messy and painful to watch, can offer a sense of hope.
Right.
It shows us that healing is possible, that even the deepest wounds can eventually scar over.
And maybe it allows us to process our own anxieties, our own fears through their struggles. It's like a safe way to confront the darkness within ourselves without having to directly experience it.
That's a really interesting point. Fiction can be a powerful tool for exploring difficult emotions and experiences. It allows us to step into someone else's shoes, to empathize with their pain without having to relive our own traumas.
Right. It's like a form of emotional rehearsal.
Yeah.
A way of building resilience and compassion. Do you think there's also a social commentary aspect to this trend of portraying damaged detectives? Is it reflecting a growing awareness of mental health issues in our society?
I think that's definitely a factor. We're moving away from the stereotype of the stoic, emotionally detached detective
Right.
and embracing a more nuanced, realistic portrayal of human experience. These characters aren't afraid to show their vulnerability, to acknowledge their struggles.
And that vulnerability can be incredibly powerful, especially for viewers who might be struggling with similar issues.
Right.
It normalizes these experiences, shows that it's okay to not be okay,
Yeah.
and that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Exactly. It challenges the stigma surrounding mental health.
Yep.
And encourages open dialogue about these issues.
But there's also a potential downside to this fascination with damaged detectives, right?
There is a risk of romanticizing trauma,
Right.
of seeing it as a prerequisite for a compelling character. We need to be careful not to glamorize suffering or imply that it's somehow a badge of honor.
Right.
Trauma is a real and devastating experience, and it's important to portray it with sensitivity and respect.
So it's a delicate balance. We want to acknowledge the impact of trauma without sensationalizing it or exploiting it for entertainment.
Yeah.
It's about finding the truth in these stories, the humanity in these characters, without losing sight of the real-world consequences of violence and suffering.
Exactly. It's about using fiction as a tool for understanding, for empathy, for sparking important conversations about how we as a society address trauma and support those who've been affected by it.
Oh. It feels like we're at a point in our culture where we're more willing to acknowledge the complexities of human experience, the shadows that lurk beneath the surface. And these damaged detectives, in their own flawed and often heartbreaking way, are helping us to navigate those complexities. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of damaged detectives, I want to leave you with a question to ponder. Out of all the detectives we've discussed today, is there one who particularly resonates with you?
Yep.
What is it about their story, their struggles, their coping mechanisms that you find so compelling? Do you see any parallels between their experiences and your own, or perhaps the experiences of people you know? Think about the reasons you're drawn to these characters. Is it their vulnerability, their resilience, their relentless pursuit of justice? Or is it something else entirely? Something that speaks to a deeper truth about the human condition?
And as you reflect on these questions, consider this. Do you think this trend of portraying flawed heroes is ultimately a positive or negative thing for our culture?
Yeah. Does it help us to better understand the complexities of human nature and the impact of trauma?
Or could it be that it inadvertently glamorizes suffering or perpetuates harmful stereotypes?
These are questions that don't have easy answers, but they're worth exploring. And perhaps by engaging with these stories and reflecting on our own responses to them, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Yeah, I think so too.
We hope this deep dive has sparked some thought-provoking conversations and maybe even inspired you to check out some of the shows we discussed. If you found yourself particularly drawn to any of these characters, we encourage you to delve deeper into their stories, to see how they navigate their trauma, and to discover what, if any, redemption they find along the way.
Absolutely. And remember, even though these are fictional characters, their struggles reflect real-world issues that many people face.
So as we conclude this deep dive, let's carry these conversations forward. Let's continue to explore the complexities of human experience, and let's strive to create a world where empathy and understanding guide our responses to trauma and suffering.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.